I'm Jeff Carter, Program Specialist with Seattle City Club. And before we begin, I'd like to let you know that Seattle City Club is a small nonprofit with a big mission to strengthen our community through conversations with community leaders on critical topics like this one and encourage civic engagement. So please consider supporting us to continue programs like these by making donation to on our website, seattlecityclub.org. And as reminders, we have website etiquette. So as you can see in the chat, we posted community standards for webinar behavior. We want to ensure a positive, welcoming atmosphere for all to contribute. And please put questions in the Q&A box below or in the chat at any time, and we will relay those to Mike, to the moderator when we for him to use at his discretion. This webinar is being recorded and we'll post it on our City Club website next week. And just as a reminder, this is part one. We'll have a second panel discussion immediately after this one with other leaders in the nonprofit sector. So I will now turn this over to Mike Lindblom, transportation reporter with the Seattle Times. Mike, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. It's an honor to be here with our four leaders, Michelle Allison from King County Metro, Greg Spotts, Seattle DOT, Rick Ilgenfritz at Community Transit, and Julie Tim from Sound Transit. Today's topic is transit accessibility, which can mean almost anything, a huge range of missions. When I think of accessibility, the first thing I think of is the new H line in Burien, where King County Metro added sidewalks at the corner of 128th and Ambom. So this December, people will not have to stand in the slush to catch their bus ride up the road to White Center. At the opposite end, there's the $3 billion or maybe $15 billion question, or maybe $800 million question of whether you bite the bullet and build a difficult Sound Transit 3 tunnel station at Union Station, where everything converges transit-wise, or do you do something else, such as put a hub in Pioneer Square? Okay, with that, let's go to the first question. I want each of you, I guess we'll start in the north with Rick. What does your agency do that's distinctive or that is better than your peers to provide transit accessibility?
Well, thanks, Mike. Greetings to you and greetings to the other panelists. I think we all strive every day to do the best we can. And if I have a brag, I'll think of it as I answer your question. But what we see in the numbers and in our feedback from our customers is that where we have frequent service, we see the best customer response and the highest levels of customer satisfaction. So service quality is really the thing that we are most proud of. And it's, as we come out of the pandemic, it's where we see ridership and system performance improving most quickly. And at the core of that for us is our Swift Bus Rapid Transit network. As you know, we have two operating lines today, Green Line and Blue Line, and we have 4 active capital projects underway to expand that network. Our third line, Orange, is under construction. The Blue Line and Green Line are being extended, and we're planning a 4th line, the Gold Line, which will go up into North County and serve the Cascade Industrial Center. So the thing I think we do best, though, I did find it, I believe we have the best bike racks in transit on board our Swift BRT coaches. They're inside the vehicle and they are roll on, roll off, and super easy to use.
All right. Okay, let's go to Greg. At Seattle DOT, what do you do that's distinctive to provide better access?
You know, I was very excited when I got to the agency and learned that because of the Seattle Transportation Benefits District, we actually have a revenue source where we can make investments in transit. You know, in the beginning, I saw like really great, deep, mutually trusting, collaborative relationships with our transit partners. But I then learned that we're actually able to put money into, you know, King County Metro. And I would say perhaps the most satisfying day I've had on the job so far was the day where we announced that we're giving 10,000 Orca cards to the residents of Seattle Public Housing. And I had a chance to meet two of those residents, people who are on fixed incomes. I mean, imagine what the inflation in the supermarket feels like when you're on, a fixed income of government support. And you give like free transit to that person, and then they don't have to choose between mobility and food. And it was so powerful. And I felt so honored to be part of an agency that looked at this revenue stream, in such a progressive way. So that's like one of my very favorite things so far.
All right. Let's hear from King County Metro. What's your strong point or distinctive
Yeah.
way to provide access?
Well, we have boats as a mobility agency. So I'm just going to say, probably from anyone on this call, we provide marine service the best. But in seriousness to your question, I'm really proud of the fact that we feed the spine, and we are going to make all those connections throughout the county that make the rest of the system work. So we are really, we think of ourselves very proudly as a mobility agency that's integrating all of the different modes and the different services that come out, including Sound Transit, right? So it is through Metro that our shared riders have the ability to access all the different neighborhoods and transit hubs and major employment centers throughout the county. We're super proud of that, and we do that really well.
Okay, and Sound Transit.
Well, I think what we do best is, or better than our peers, is the thing that our peers don't do. We build light rail. So it's easy to be the best at doing something that we're the only ones doing. But in seriousness, we are that spine. We are creating that expansion of connectivity, that high capacity transit network that our partners feed into. Being that backbone, that spine is something that's so critical to a truly accessible system that people can use to transfer between modes. And I was very proud. I wish I could claim credit for this, but I have to throw this one over to Michelle, that when we had the ICE light rail continue to run, articulated buses, they're great every day, not so good on icy streets. Our rail continued to operate through all the weather, and that was pretty awesome. And I wish, again, I could take credit for it, but it was King County Metro staff who made that happen.
All right, yeah, and Portland has had a lot more struggles than Seattle in that respect. Should be noted that crews are working overnight, running trains to keep the catenaries dry, ice free. Okay, in what area does your agency lag in access, or is there a yawning access need that you want to address? And we'll go the other direction and start with Julie.
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to go with the obvious here. Vertical conveyances, elevators, and escalators. That really is a challenge for us, that to make sure that they're running. I think that the storytelling around that is probably the bigger challenge. There's so many of those vertical conveyances that are being managed well and that are up and running. But when we have a Westlake, if the power goes out, or if we have some college kids who are going to rent at the station and have a little bit of fun on the escalators, and you're the person who has to follow behind that and go up and down if you have accessibility needs and those elevators aren't working, that's a critical challenge for us. We're really focusing on it this year to make sure that we get ahead of that. We have made amazing advances over the past several months, past couple of years even, and I think that you'll continue to see changes in making sure that the reliability of those vertical conveyances is consistent.
And Michelle?
Yeah, for us, we saw this pretty clearly in our engagements with our customers as we're recovering from COVID, but that all-day network, people want to use transit for myriads of things, and we are really built and historically have been really built around the commute pattern. And now that's not going to work. Folks really want your all-day connection and your weekends. And so that is something that we have seen pretty clearly in the feedback from everyone, frankly. And so that is work that we can do to better provide access so that those trips, no matter what they are there in the system for folks to utilize.
Okay. Greg, how about Seattle DOT? What do you need to do for better access?
So, one of the findings in our Vision Zero top to bottom review is that sometimes it's unclear how to add in and fund and design, pedestrian safety improvements to maintenance projects. And I'm finding that there's a lot of improvement potential available where when we're looking at repaving a street, doing more than just like installing curb ramps or updating the curb ramps, but really taking a look at where are the bus stops along the road? What's the access like to those bus stops currently? Are there long crossing distances? Is there like a slip lane where unsignalized traffic people are expected to cross? And really kind of doing like an audit of the accessibility, not just like building some curb ramps. So that's a work in progress.
Okay, and how about community transit? What do you need to do to improve access? Rick is muted. Okay.
Don't know how that happened. Here we are 3 years later, still muting. I was going to echo Michelle's comment that, the weekend service in particular is a place where our ridership now exceeds our pre-pandemic performance. And it speaks to the need to provide mobility services all day, every day. And it also reflects how people are moving around differently and using transit differently. Some of the things I think we need to work on at a macro level, the industry has struggled with workforce challenges, as you know, and that has affected service reliability at times. And that's something we really need to work on, particularly for our DART customers, our paratransit customers. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to ensure that shuttle bus is there when they need it. I have some specific issues up in Snohomish County I'm interested in addressing. We have a lot of rural routes, and a lot of our stop facilities out in the rural parts of the county aren't great and are in need of some improvements in order to make our system more accessible. And then I think overall as an industry, we have never done a super great job on that last mile and making it easy and convenient for people to choose transit. And so I think we have an opportunity post-pandemic to think differently about that and to experiment with ways we can go get folks rather than assuming they're going to come to us. So more to talk about there.
Let's explore that change in travel for a minute here. How and when will Metro and Community Transit be reconfiguring their service to have a flatter, more of an all-day profile? Well, can you expect any changes later in 2023, for instance, if you are a regular user of the bus services?
Who goes first? Was that to me or to Michelle?
Well, yeah, you and Michelle. Sound Transit is relatively flat already with Link.
I'll say a few words. Our big network restructure is being planned around the opening of Lynnwood Link, which is next year, not this year. We are taking that plan to our board of directors next week for consideration and possible action. In that plan, we will pull about 30% of our service, which currently serves downtown in North King County, and redeploy that service within Snohomish County. So our network in 2024 will get more frequent and the coverage of the network will become more comprehensive. So we're expecting to see essentially a light rail dividend up in Snohomish County that will address some of these issues, but it's 2024, not 2023.
Okay, how about at Metro?
Yeah, we're in the process of actively engaging with community members and tying our conversations about reinvestment of suspended service hours to those service changes that are happening in coordination with Link Light Rail opening or those other regional service changes in the system. So not in 2023, but we will be doing that in conjunction with where we are also already having service changes. So those suspended hours are going to come back in a different way for that all-day network. Just also, Rick, that's a huge change to your system. Congratulations. That's an awesome thing.
Yeah. Do you get much of a dividend with just having light rail in Shoreline, north and south? That's not a massive amount of Metro's overall network. How much dividend can you really get from that?
Yeah, probably not a ton, but there's other network connections that you can do outside of just Link Light Rail to make some neighborhood connections in coordination with other activities and feedback from the community. So I think it's mostly the system as a whole, not necessarily that one particular piece that's going to get us the benefit in that geographic location.
Okay. Julie Tim from Sound Transit said something really intriguing at a national forum last week, that with the work week getting humpier, more concentrated, she didn't say humpier, that's my phrase, concentrated Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that maybe maintenance outages that disrupt service might be better done on Monday than on Saturday. And there are times, the Highway 99 tunnel and Link, there are times of year when Saturday is busier than Monday. Is that going to happen later this year, or are you already rescheduling maintenance work for Mondays or Fridays instead of weekends? How strong of a push is that?
So it really depends on what it is we're doing. If there is an immediate repair that needs to happen, that doesn't wait. You know, safety first. And King County Metro is on that. There are times, as the system is a very complex system, things will break. And when they break, we have to go out and fix them immediately. If it's a safety issue, a service issue, that putting that to the side, those things that we can plan for, the regular maintenance, state of good repair, system upgrades, redirection of policy, those things we're being very, very intentional to slow down temporarily on when we do those, so that we can look at when is the ridership lowest, the impacts the lowest, what kind of impacts we have, can it be accommodated through a bus bridge? When we think about bus bridges, if we have to close the tunnel for something major and there has to be a bus bridge, when's the best time, not just for low ridership, but also when King County Metro has enough operators to operate it. We're considering that. And every day right now, as we're looking for the next year worth of major repair, reconstruction, renovation, future ready work, we are being very deliberate about when is the lowest ridership, the highest amount of availability for bus bridges when needed, if needed, and avoidance of major public events and games, events, concerts. All of that is being taken into consideration. So there are items for repairs that we've talked about in our committees that we were planning on doing this year, but looking at that ridership, looking at those factors, we're going to do it in the January, February of 2024 timeframe, because that's when we know ridership is lowest, events are lowest. So there are some events, some major events that we are pushing out to accommodate that shift in ridership and the shift in availability of resources.
How does Greg Spots, how does Seattle DOT fit into these changing travel patterns and what seems to be an industry-wide view toward flattening the service and going for all-day clientele?
I think that the sort of flattening presents some really exciting opportunities that we may not even have figured out what they are quite yet at times. But, you know, when you think about it, the least efficient way to build out your street system is to build it for like 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the night where everybody wants to be on it. And once like people not only are staggering different commute days, but also I believe part of the revolution of remote work is people don't need to be at their desk at 8. Like the bosses are no longer so concerned with everybody starting and finishing their day at the same time. So I think you're seeing, I'm watching in my staff, a lot of time shifting even on the days where people do come in. And so you have like a really interesting opportunity to think about sort of a more holistic use of our streets for not only like supporting all modes, but also placemaking, you know, making our streets places you want to go to, not just pass through. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for that when we're not just all out trying to max throughput, you know, in the AM and PM. I mean, for example, like, you ever been to like a nice walkable retail corridor where they take out the curb parking on like the afternoon commute, and all of a sudden it becomes kind of a hostile place to be, where it's like wall to wall cars from curb face to curb face. Maybe we don't need to do that anymore. There's so many interesting kind of possibilities when we can kind of spread, that demand across different times and different days.
All right. I want to follow a couple of the answers we had earlier. Swift lines are increasing in Snohomish County, and an issue that I've talked about with Mill Creek leaders and community transit is apartment clusters. These buses go through neighborhoods that have pretty dense populations, but don't look like urban neighborhoods, and maybe you breach a fence or you build a sidewalk or a shortcut that gets people out of their apartment pods more easily to the buses. Is community transit working on anything like that? Should you be, and what are the pros and cons of stretching access farther than just the boarding platforms?
Making sure I'm not muted again. We work very closely with our host jurisdictions to make sure that our service plans and our capital projects are reflected in and addressed by municipal comp plans. And we're fortunate to enjoy really good collaborative relationships with most of our cities. All the cities up here are planning to accommodate growth, and our SWIFT network is being planned to accommodate that growth. The built environment is going to be critical to making transit accessible. So, we want to work as closely as we can with those jurisdictions on station placements and on access to stations, on pedestrian pathways, on signalization, wayfinding, all of that to make sure that the system works as well as it can. So at a broad level, yes, absolutely. We involved the city of Mill Creek in planning and the city of Lynnwood in planning the Orange Line project. Any project, whether it's a rail project or a bus line, you're going to learn things about it after it opens that you're going to have to respond to. People don't interact with new infrastructure necessarily 100% the way you think they're going to when you're designing it. And so we need to really pay attention after the Orange Line, for example, opens, and see what kind of issues we can observe and identify and react to once it's up and running. So, which next is going to be next March of 2024. So we'll have hopefully several months of experience with the project and with the system before the Lynnwood Link line opens.
Yeah, and I can't let this hour go by without bringing up WashDOT's plans to repave 2 or more lanes at a time of I-5, and they'll probably take 3 lanes to avoid unsafe drivers veering into them. And everybody that I've heard so far, including Rick, has been really ambivalent about whether Lynnwood Link should be pushed to the front of the line and open before all this happens to give people an option, or will the whole system be in breakdown and sour everybody's view of Lynnwood Link with overcrowded trains that can't arrive quickly enough. What's the latest strategy? And Rick, Julia, have you come up with a clear path to providing excellent service next year?
Rick,
If you
go
think,
ahead.
if you think I'm ambivalent, then I have successfully concealed my feelings from you.
Okay, publicly ambivalent. It's a massive headache. Let's just we'll set it there for now. But
yeah, I mean,
what's the game plan?
The 4 of us here on this panel, I certainly won't speak for my colleagues, but we all see a perfect storm brewing. And there's a ton of work going on behind the scenes to try to get all the various capital project schedules aligned and to get the service plans aligned, but it's a monumental undertaking. So, we're at the table every week with our colleagues from WashDOT trying out ideas and iterating and problem solving. Our first and foremost goal is to secure transit priority through the corridor for the duration of construction. Our second priority is to get the project schedules aligned to the maximum extent possible so that Lynnwood opens before they start shutting lanes down. And then we're having a sort of a third thread of conversation about the amount of additional transit capacity that may be necessary to mitigate the resulting congestion. But I-5 North, that's the critical load point for the entire transportation system in our region, between the ship canal and the county line. There isn't a corridor in the state that carries more people and goods. And so once we start changing the way that corridor operates, it's going to affect all of us. So it's going to take all of us working together to get through it.
Julie Chen, have you come up with any further thoughts or strategies to deal with this problem?
Well, I have to admit that when this first kind of came onto my desk and we started talking about it, it was absolutely, for probably the first 24 hours, one of those head desk moments where I'm just like, oh, it is the perfect storm, as Rick said. And then after that initial like, oof moment, we all got together, rolled up our sleeves, and we're working together to try and find the best solution possible. WashDOT, I think that they planned to do this work. They've been planning for it for some time with the understanding about how the network would work this year and next year. And it's just, life happened. And I don't mean to be dismissive. It's very, very frustrating for our team and the entire community that we're dealing with these challenges in network. With that said, we are looking under every boulder, every stone. I wouldn't say we've gotten to every pebble yet, but we are working together to try and find solutions to increase the frequency, get that service started as quickly as possible. The best we can come up with so far, I think, looking into the boulders and the rocks, is really looking for that dedicated transit lane adjacent to construction, and possibly doing a lot more communication with the public to make them aware that this perfect storm is coming so they can start planning their travel path as well. I don't know if there's a perfect solution. It's going to take a wide range of small solutions to make this bearable.
And it should be mentioned here that the Northgate station is now the #1 link station with about 11,000 boardings a day. It's overtaken Westlake Center, and U District Station is #3. That tells me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that tells me that there are 1,000 people that are willing and have actually become accustomed to making that hop from Snohomish County to Northgate. And do you preserve that at all costs and run massive amounts of buses through a dedicated transit lane to Northgate, and will WashDOT accept that at the expense of general drivers? All good stuff we'll hit later. I think the reader questions coming in, or not reader questions, the viewer questions coming in look more interesting than mine, so I think we should jump over and start hitting a few of them. Let's see. Jeff, are you going to choose from here, or should I just scroll the margin and launch a few of these?
You choose.
Okay. How many of your planners are physically disabled? And I think that implies another question as to how is your service improving to help people with physical disabilities get around better? Let's start with Metro, Michelle.
I can certainly answer the spirit of that question. It's really important for Metro to have a diverse workforce that looks like the communities we serve, and that is the entire community, including folks with disabilities who need to access our system in different ways or use paratransit for their mobility needs. So both inside the organization to have that expertise, but also really importantly to invite communities to inform how we do that work. We may think we have a good idea and we need to go ensure that we do, and really use the wisdom of the community to help inform how we provide service in an accessible way so that everyone has an opportunity for mobility regardless of their ability. And so that is both through staffing, but a lot of that information also comes directly from community engagement, and we can always do better. And this is one space that it is not just an access component of our system, it's also how our fixed route system as a whole can also be better accessible for folks too. So that's.
Can you point to a good example of something you've heard from the community or from?
Yes, absolutely.
And that you're going to be doing soon?
Yeah, one is as simple as how do you secure a wheelchair on your coach? And there have been some new technologies in that space, and we have purchased and are installing that now, and it is a lot more independent and easy and a lot just better for the customer and for the system as a whole with the new technology. That is one small example, and that was sourced and verified from community engagement.
Can you describe a little bit how that's shaped and how people use that device?
I mean, I can.
Give it a try. Yeah.
Okay, hold on one second. There is a lot happening here, so I just want to make sure I don't get it wrong. I want to start with the name of the system too. It's the Q Straight, and it is a one-touch system. So instead of having to maneuver to the perfect space, you hit the button and it sort of comes around you. And it's very cool, and it is a really innovative part of our system. Q Straight. Okay.
Yeah, give me a call when you install those. Maybe
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. This is, I think, a sound transit question. Will Lynnwood Station be getting security and ambassadors from the start? I'm using it to take my kids to a ball game in Seattle and worry when I see incidents happening at other stations. Julie Chen.
Absolutely. From day one, there will be ambassadors, there will be security, there will be safety that will expand the system. We are ramping that up right now. I believe that if in my Twitter echo chamber, so I have one of the feedback that I get, I'm seeing a lot of responses of people seeing the increased security presence already and seeing ambassadors out on the street, the fair ambassadors for one, but we're also increasing our staff volunteers to be ambassadors for special events. We're getting a lot of volunteers for that. We also are looking for other types of engagement to make sure we have that out there from day one throughout the entire system as we expand. So that's absolutely going to be there.
Right. I've noticed the increase in security guards coming out to the system, but I'm not sure if they know, or the public or anybody knows, what the rules of engagement are yet. I was at Northgate Station. There were 6 people asleep or passed out, 2 who were clearly convulsing from drug use. The security guards didn't walk over, didn't go in there. They described their role as responding on call to urgent hazards more than inspecting vehicles. What are the rules of engagement? In what situations do you intervene? What situations do you just let people ride along in the transit vehicles as long as they're quiet or not disturbance?
We were having this is an ongoing conversation that we're having, and it's increasing now that we do have increased security contracts. And as we train our new security operators, officers, and as you see them out there, that training is ongoing as we really respond to the needs of the service today versus what it might have been in the past. That is a heartbreaking scenario that you just mentioned. And part of what we're looking to do is put better communication on our vehicles and on our stations so that when people see something, they know who to text and who to call. That when our ambassadors and officers are there, they have a clear path to getting services, whether it's EMS or crisis health services or others that need to come out and support, to make sure that they know what tools are out there. We're not perfect yet. It is a work in progress, but it is a priority for us to train people into helping to remove anyone who is violating significant code of conduct first. No drug use on our vehicles. Biohazards, very significant. If they're posing a risk, a major disturbance, absolutely making sure that's removed from the system. But we also need to look at our entire code of conduct. One of the things in the Sound Transit Code of Conduct is that when you get on our vehicles, if you have any kind of packages with you, they need to be under your seat or in a luggage bin. Well, if you're going to the airport and you have 3 suitcases, technically you're violating the code of conduct. We have to go back and re-review the rules to make sure that we are being consistent and we can apply the rules consistently, not just define what's worst. We need to make sure that we are communicating clearly. And I don't think we've done a good job of that, but that is on our radar. We're talking about it, had a conversation in depth just yesterday morning on this very topic.
Okay, looking through for community transit, is there a plan to extend smaller buses, preferably electric, into neighborhoods not currently served by transit?
Yes. So thanks for the question, and thanks, Julie, for the answer on Lynnwood. I'll digress for a minute to observe for the audience that Lynnwood is one of the busiest transit hubs in the region, and it's going to become even busier as a rail terminal and as a place where 2 BRT lines converge in addition to our local network. So we will be working with Sound Transit to bring our security personnel into that space as well. So there will be lots of eyes and ears and lots of resources available at that location. For the future, the network changes that I referred to earlier include some new routes and some new schedules, increased frequency and coverage for existing routes. And so, yes, we expect to see more service in Snohomish County, especially in places where there isn't service today. We are in the midst of a major zero emission technology feasibility study. We are looking at the full spectrum of technologies available at each vehicle scale. We are stealing liberally what our peers in the industry are learning, who already have electric buses deployed. We see real promise for using 40-foot and maybe even 35-foot vehicles, battery electric vehicles in some of our dense high frequency routes that generally are grouped in the southwest part of the county. We expect to take forward to our board of directors some recommendations and some goal setting decisions for our zero emission transition this fall. So we just procured our first battery electric bus. It's a 60-foot articulated coach. Our maintenance folks are very excited about it because it's 4-wheel drive and it doesn't have some of those snow issues that diesel Arctics
they have 6 wheels, right? What's okay?
Yeah, they have 2 motors. They have
All
a
right.
motor on the center axle as
Okay.
well. And then we bought a 40-foot electric coach that's coming next year for testing, and a 40-foot hydrogen fuel cell coach that's coming next year for testing. So we're going to do 2 years of testing with 3 vehicles, and we have some major bus procurement decisions we need to make in 2025.
Okay. I'm not seeing questions here for SDOT and Greg, but I'm going to go ahead and throw one your way. One access improvement that is almost universally admired is zero fare youth passes. And Seattle, I think it's fair to say Seattle has led the state on this issue. It's one area where the lawmakers from all over want to be like Seattle, except maybe a few in Franklin County. But what are you seeing are you seeing any increase in youth ridership that can be attributed to free youth passes? And how do you measure whether the program is successful in terms of ridership or any other metrics for young people taking transit?
Well, that's a great question. And I think we're probably doing it more. We're learning from things King County Metro is telling us. But, at this point, the youth fare is now statewide. And the fare for the Seattle public transit, public housing residents is a city-funded program. And it is evidence-based. We had evidence that it worked before we rolled it out. But, it's very interesting, sort of more broadly. I go to these Commute Seattle board meetings every month, and a bunch of us here on the call go to those meetings. And It's really like a fascinating question to figure out, like, how do we get back to Seattle's leadership role in, choice ridership that we had pre-pandemic, when these employer provided Orca cards really had lots of people using transit who could drive or use other modes. And so I think all of us together are trying to be sort of thought partners and innovators together on sort of, in this era of remote work, what are the levers that we can use, to get more and more sort of different demographics and psychographics, back onto transit. And calling back to that topic about the Revive I-5 and that construction, there are certain transit services that aren't as full as they once were before the pandemic, and that's capacity we could use to help ourselves. And there's the ability to sort of flex. Some people working remotely maybe differently when that Revive I-5 project comes in. It's such a dynamic time. Before the pandemic, we used to look at these trends of like different types of ridership, and they would change by like 1% a year or something, and now they're changing rapidly and seasonally and based on, different variants of the virus circulating. It's a very dynamic and unusual time to make predictions and even test and learn with the things we're trying, because the sort of outside factors are causing really wide variation.
Michelle, Allison, at Metro, do you have a specific target or goal for how many youth you want to be riding King County buses?
I don't know that we've set on a specific number. And in fact, we're still in the data collection of youth ridership right now. It is free, but we need folks to tap. So that will be my plug too. Please tap that card. That data is invaluable to us. What we do anecdotally see are peaks in use during different times of year that are attributed to youth ridership. It is also incredibly important, two things here that we're really interested in continuing to explore. We're building the next generation of public transportation riders. Folks who know how to use the system from a younger age, they'll invite their friends to, they'll invite their family to. That is so important. And really understanding how they want to use the system and the barriers that are there for them is really an incredible part of seeding that next generation and building that enthusiasm and that support for public transit. The other is that a fare-free system really allows family to have different access to opportunities. If a mother with 3 kids now doesn't have to worry about that transportation cost, what else can she do with that resource? That's incredible. That's a values-based decision that I think we're all really excited to continue to expand throughout the state.
There's another benefit that doesn't get talked about, which is it's similar to what the electric industry calls load shaping. In West Seattle, when you see the high school kids and the Madison middle school kids on the bus, they are going in a different direction than the adult commuters generally go, and they are getting off the bus at the stops where the adults get on. So you're getting more value, more capacity out of the same bus lines. And I think this also applies somewhat to Link. The kids get out at Franklin High School a couple hours before the adults come out of downtown. So you're really making better use of these transit vehicles too, in addition to serving kids. So
Great point.
Let's hit a few other reader questions here.
Mike, I wish I'd said that. That was so good.
Well, I've had 20 years to come up with this stuff, covering transportation in Seattle, and rode the 358 in the late 70s before it became the E-line. So a lot of idle time. Let's see. In a lot of areas, particularly downtown Seattle and at the airport, there are not many signs advertising the option of light rail or directing people to the location of the train. How are you, Julie Tim, working on improving signage regarding rail stops?
Well, I think that's actually a twofold question. Greg, I'm priming you to jump in, and Michelle, as I'm going to answer first and then give y'all cues that if you want to jump in, please feel free. We are working very much on wayfinding. So there's the wayfinding that's outside the system within the community to direct people to our stations, but there's also the wayfinding directly inside our stations for how people can navigate their way through it. That's both friendly for people who don't speak English, people who maybe have other limitations, they're sight limited or hearing limited. We have to look at the wayfinding for everyone, for every parts of our community. Sound Transit right now is specifically focusing on that internal component to help people do the wayfinding through the system. If an elevator's down and you approach the elevator and you need it because you're in a wheelchair or you have a bike, how do you find the next elevator? What's that wayfinding look like inside and around our stations? If a station is down and we have a bus bridge, when people come up to the station, how do they get themselves to that bus stop and that bus bridge? And what's that wayfinding there? That's really where the Sound Transit focus is right now. But I will agree that when I'm outside the system and using it and I'm trying to find it, still 6 months in, even knowing the system, even writing all the time, sometimes I get a little bit turned around. I'm like, I can't remember which corner our entrance is in. They can be a little bit hard to see, especially in the urban environment. And that's where I think that we need to look at an approach that goes beyond the boundaries of Sound Transit at wayfinding in general. And I did see just in this morning, I noticed, I think it was yesterday I saw it, that Greg's team has been working on some wayfinding for the city. There was a wayfinding post at the International District Station that's just been replaced. And I took some time to look at this morning and gave a little happy dance. So I'm seeing some more of that. And I'd love to hear more of that from Greg and maybe Michelle about how they're doing the wayfinding for this broader system away from our stations. Sorry.
Yeah, you know what, SDOT, we have a pretty sophisticated team who's been doing a lot of like thinking and analysis and planning on wayfinding. And I think the critical constraint is funding, which is really confusing because it seems like such a small thing, but it isn't a thing that has like a standard dedicated continuous funding source. And I'd like to try to find a way to remedy that because as a new Seattleite the last 6 months, who didn't bring a car here, there are times where I find myself somewhere with excellent wayfinding, like Seward Park, and there's like these cute little green signs that got me to the park, walking through different community streets. And then there's other places where, cyclists have told me they really don't know how to get from one part of an off-street bike trail to the other part because there's just 2 blocks without clear signage. So I think like wayfinding is a critically underutilized tool in our toolkit. And I'm hoping that as Mayor Harrell stands up his downtown activation plan, that there'll be a component to really make downtown more legible for tourists, for our convention goers, and people who are coming in from the suburbs to come to an event.
Since we're talking about roadside equipment, I'm going to toss out a pet peeve for Michelle Allison to answer. The Metro has these roadside kiosks that were built in the early 2010s with electronic real-time scrolling information. They quit working, I think, a little over 5 years ago. The artwork is a really great idea that's on them right now. But when is Metro going to tear those out?
One always wants Mike Lindblom to tee up a question with my biggest pet peeve. You're going to win that answer.
No, it's not
Mike.
the biggest, but it's a
yeah.
peeve.
No, I appreciate that. I can't give you a specific date, but I will follow up on that. But what I'll also say is the technology that we use to help provide information and wayfinding is just as important as the wayfinding itself. So that always has to be revisited and updated as we get better technology options. A great example is the H line. We just received an award from Smart Cities for our e-paper technology on H-Line. It is a much more accessible, much clearer, much more legible than our previous rapid rides. And so we need to go back and figure out how we update that technology as we go. These are systems that have been in place for a while, and options are better now than they were before. And that's just part of what we need to do for our system to keep it relevant.
Yeah, and I'm just talking about the street clutter. One Bus Away has been serving really well lately, and the new H-Line reader boards look great, but yeah, this is purely an issue of street clutter. And I could ask the same thing about SDOT and the abandoned newsstand at 3rd and Pike, but maybe we'll do that.
I'm doing a newsstand tour this afternoon with staff, so I'll answer that next week.
Let's go back to readers. There was a little bit of snark earlier here. Let's go back to it.
We celebrate the snark?
Okay, I think this is for Metro. It could be Sound Transit. Thank you for putting fentanyl sensors in the buses and trains and studying this issue. That being said, why did you not come out publicly and push back against public health, who was throwing your drivers under the bus. Do any of the transit CEOs want to
I would love to start.
address that?
Yeah, this is a conversation shared, I think, by everyone on this call, just how important the safety is of our operators and our riders. It is the number one job that we spend most of our time talking about. And we are in a really challenging environment where transit often experiences what the rest of the environmental conditions are. And right now, there is a public health crisis for both behavioral health and substance abuse. And that does show up on our system. And by no means is that appropriate. There is no tolerance or acceptance for drug use on our coaches. And we've got to figure out how to address that. We have been working really closely on air quality monitoring with public health. There's not a whole lot of current science. There's been studies and some analysis done to date, but more work is needed, which is why we all partnered together with UW on this really exciting work to help us get really clear and to inform our next steps on how to continue to make our coaches safe. And that's the work we're doing. But the knowledge to date and the information to date, not just from public health, but from other organizations who monitor air quality, is that the risk is low. And the fear is high and the concern is high. So we're taking that seriously, and we're going to work to gather more information and data to help inform our next steps. Offer it to any of my other colleagues, but wanted to be clear that this Metro is very mindful of this and working very closely with folks to better understand some next steps.
I'm just going to applaud and cheer and say exactly what she said.
Rick, is this much of an issue in Snohomish County?
Mute, Rick.
You know, I got nothing. No, I have a response to the question. I don't have anything on my bad mute behavior. We are participants in the study. We have an industrial hygienist on board who's working with our vehicle maintenance folks and the UW and the other study participants to oversee and facilitate the data collection. I think everything Michelle said is spot on. For most folks who are using transit, perception is reality, and we need to address how people feel. So in addition to doing the study, we are also experimenting with different types of interventions to deter illicit activity. Our goal is not to charge and convict and punish. Our goal is to deter and to protect the space where our customers are riding, whether they're on the vehicles or at the stations. We did a pilot project last year where we surged ambassadors and road supervisors into the blue line during the evenings. And what we found was just having an increased presence deterred almost all of the activity. So we'll be standing up next month, this coming month, April, a new transit security detail that will be staffed with community transit employees who are trained in intervention and de-escalation, and they will lead with the social service response. So we'll also have our transit police available when they're needed, and we'll have our service ambassadors leading with customer education. But our goal is to establish a higher degree of presence to make sure our customers and our employees know that we're protecting the space they're using. Anyway, that's a little bit of a divergence off the question, but I think it's important.
Yeah, related to that, there was a Supreme Court ruling a couple weeks ago where the court upheld in general the right of transit agencies to conduct roving fare enforcement, but 3 members objected to police doing it as being inherently a Fourth Amendment violation, and 2 others said the police weren't properly authorized to do this. What effect, if any, does that ruling have on how your 3 transit agencies will conduct fare enforcement?
Well, I think you hit it. The most important part of that decision is that they upheld the statute and recognized the transit agency's necessity to be able to collect fares and enforce payment. So it was an interesting decision. There were 3 or 4 different majorities on different topics within it. So for students of constitutional law, it's a great case study. Our goal, as I said a minute ago, is to lead with a layered approach. We use fare ambassadors. In fact, community transit initiated the Fair Ambassador practice back in 2009 when we opened the Blue Line. And we will continue to lead with those personnel and our transit security officers who are CT employees. And we will use our sheriff's deputies on an as-needed basis to support the CT employees. We won't have our sheriff's deputies initiating fair enforcement activity. We'll reserve them for other more intensive needs or to support the ambassadors if they encounter a difficult situation.
So police are the last resort, not the front line of fair enforcement.
I mean, police are there to address criminal activity. So our fair ambassadors and our transit security officers will lead on fair education and fair compliance.
For Metro, we had already made this shift before this ruling, and so we are in compliance with what the Supreme Court issued, where similarly to Rick's program, we have transit security officers and fair ambassadors and not Metro Transit Police providing this function. We're still looking at our SAFE reform, which is a large initiative that we have inside the organization in partnership with community to inform how our fair program works. It is a really important component of our system from a revenue perspective, but also a rider experience one. So any additional changes will come from recommendations from that. But we are in compliance.
I think we have time for one final question. It's more of a comment seeking a response than maybe a question. I have a question for Greg. I live in Belltown and am watching progress with great interest in the connections between Belltown and the Seattle waterfront. Is SDOT prioritizing active transportation solutions to discourage single occupancy vehicles while encouraging and incentivizing bike and pedestrian access? I realize this is a loaded question, wink. What's your
triple yes is the answer? Yes, a wholehearted yes is the answer. First of all, I've been kind of uplifting building the third streetcar segment as a way to, in part, connect all these wonderful neighborhoods with the waterfront. There's a really interesting question, like you can get people up the hill from the waterfront to First, but how do we get them to transit from there? And I think that the building out the full streetcar, the culture connector would be a great way to do that. Also, the waterfront office is managing the Pike and Pine Street configuration and enhancement project, and those become one-way streets, and there's a lot more space for bikes and peds. So that's going to really help with our east-west connections, not just from the waterfront into the downtown, but all the way up into Capitol Hill. That project goes all the way over I-5 and into Capitol Hill. So there's just an intense and iterative effort to make it so that people can flow freely on foot and on bike across all these wonderful attractions.
Is SDOT going to tame the 7+ lane road stretch near the ferry terminal so my brother and I can walk to the Sea Line stop after the Mariners game and not have our head on a swivel with turning cars? I think that I don't know if this person is implying that, but that's a common gripe down there, as you know. Does SDOT have any tweaks or remedies?
I've been told that there was an agreement that lanes could be reduced once the West Seattle to Ballard extension is built. But
a ways off.
That's a ways away. But I do think sometimes people hold up that one part of Alaska Way as sort of like Exhibit A, that that we didn't get the sort of less car environment that we wanted from the waterfront. But as you walk north, you're going to see 40, 50, 60, 70 feet of right-of-way devoted to bikes and peds. And a lot of those pathways north of the ferry terminal and gardens and everything haven't been fully constructed yet. They're not on the critical path of construction, so they're coming a little bit later. But as that comes into focus, it's going to be amazing to see how much width has been devoted to not only other modes, but placemaking and people hanging out and enjoying the waterfront. I'm already spending time down there and finding it to be a lot of fun.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I think that takes us to the hour. And Jeff, you want to take us out?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. thank you, Rick and Julie and Greg and Michelle. Really appreciate your participating in this really important conversation. It's great for us to hear what's going on directly from the executives and how all this complex system is coming together and serving us all. So really appreciate having you on this call. We're going to switch to our next panel, and we'll have Kirk Hovenkotter with Executive Director of Commute Seattle, Stacy Sahu, Director of Mobility Management with HopeLink, and Kelsey Mesher, Deputy Director with Transportation Choices Coalition. So please, everyone, stick around. We're going to have a great conversation, a follow-up to what we just heard, and more details about what the nonprofit sector is doing to help with transportation accessibility. So we'll switch our panelists right now, and we'll continue the conversation. So thanks again,
right.
and have a great day. Thanks, Mike. And so on behalf of the board and staff at Seattle City Club, thanks again. Thanks to all of you who are sticking around for our second panel discussion on transportation accessibility. I also want to thank our sponsor, Alaska Airlines. So we'll get the panelists on board. So please keep submitting your questions. And like I said in the chat, we'll be able to probably answer some of those that were directed to the executives. Not that Kelsey and Kirk and Stacy are part of the executive teams of their organizations, but I'm sure they can address some of the questions that have been posted already. So, all right, it looks like we're in. Hi, Stacy. And we've got, let's see if everyone else is there. Yeah, Kirk, great. How you doing? And Kelsey. All right. Well, I will be moderating this conversation. So why don't I just jump right in and just talk briefly about what you do, your organization does, in case people aren't familiar with who you are. So Kirk, how about you start with Commute Seattle?
Absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much for having us. I'm Kirk Hovenkotter, he, him. I'm the Executive Director of Commute Seattle. We're the nonprofit that works to make it easy to walk, bike, ride, and roll for the 600,000 people who come to work or school in Seattle every single day. And I just want to take a moment. It was a rock star panel that we just heard from with the executives of our transportation organizations. And I was really proud to be doing this work in this region. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Kelsey?
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm Kelsey Mesher, she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director at Transportation Choices Coalition. We are a nonprofit in our 30th year. We work statewide, supporting more and better transportation choices at the intersection of health, sustainability, and equity. So a lot of our work looks like really strong support for public transportation.
Thanks, Kelsey. Stacy.
Hi, yes, thanks so much, Jeff, for having us. And thanks for having this conversation with the nonprofits as well. Really looking forward to it. So I'm Stacy Sahu, as she, her pronouns. I serve as the Director of Mobility Management at HopeLink. HopeLink in its name does not have transportation or mobility in it, but we are a community action agency based in King County, Washington. We've been around for over 50 years, which is amazing. But for those that aren't as familiar with us, we have so many different kinds of programs, food markets, financial assistance, housing and case management. But with our theory of change, we've really rooted transportation and mobility as ensuring stability in someone's life and equipping them to exit poverty. And so we have a really robust transportation department at HopeLink. So I oversee our mobility management team, which in essence educates, coordinates, and advocates. So we ensure everyone has access to information and the education about what transportation options are available in the region. We coordinate through cross sectors and work with different transportation providers to improve transportation through mobility coalitions. And then we ultimately advocate and by working with decision makers and amplifying the voices of those impacted by the transportation system. So a lot to unpack, and all well within a holistic framework of how to eliminate poverty in the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Let's take a little bit of step back. In the first panel, we just kind of jumped into talking about transportation accessibility. So why don't we just talk about what transportation accessibility really means? So Kirk, do you want to just kind of start? with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from our role at Commute Seattle, we really see that transportation accessibility is access to Seattle's opportunities. We work every day with people who come from across the region to jobs or school in Seattle. And we see that long commutes or the lack of transit passes can make it difficult to reach those opportunities and benefit from the growth and the dynamicism of Seattle. And so a lot of our work is to help get transit passes into the hands of people, help make properties have world-class bike facilities, and help policymakers make smart decisions of how to put those opportunities within the reach of more people. And so our work is really to help through policies, through shaping buildings where people go to work or school, or shaping the policies of the employers where they work at to help make it easier to reach those opportunities for people across the region and to address the inequities that we see in our transportation system through those policies.
Thanks. Kelsey or Stacy, feel free to weigh in. What would you say is transportation accessibility? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think, building off of what Kirk mentioned, accessibility is a really broad, can be a really broad topic in transportation. I think, a traditional idea of it is like, can I physically get to my bus? Can I walk or roll there and physically access it? But I think our organization, we do policy and advocacy work, and we try to think really holistically about all of the components of access. So that's everything from, can I afford my bus fare? Can I find a place to purchase my bus fare or to get that free Orca card that Director Spots was talking about? Does my bus come frequently enough and go to where I need it to go? To everything from like, what is my experience like when I'm riding? Is it a welcoming place for me to be? Do I feel comfortable taking public transit home from my job late at night? Am I gonna be harassed by others or free from disproportionate impacts of enforcement? So I think we need to look at access really holistically if we're going to really create a system that is going to work for everyone. And really solve some of the big challenges that we're trying to solve with transportation.
Thanks. Stacy?
Yeah, thanks so much. Oh, I loved hearing from Kurt and Kelsey. It's really great. And again, the framing of it, kind of removing it from the actual transportation network itself, but as Kurt said, like the access to opportunities and access to communities, I think the framework that we use in mobility management is really focusing on that individual level and that customer. So start and end, what do they need? What is their eligibility? What's their mobility accommodations that they need? And really focusing on them. So I just appreciate the kind of the direction of thinking about the kind of destinations that we want people to access, being able to not only access work and school, but play, social connections, reducing social isolation. How are we thinking of that full experience, not just the physical services, but the affordability, the safety. And then again, the lens that we usually take is we tend to help and support people with transportation that have nowhere else to go. And because of the system that we've developed, have been completely left behind and are not even making a trip at all because they can't, the services are not made for them or not built for them. So really kind of looking at it and reframing it, not on the system level, but on the individual level of what is it that they need? What are their mobility needs? And it changes day by day. I mean, what's interesting is that they can take a certain mode to get to work, but if they need to get to a medical appointment and are feeling uncomfortable at the end of it, they might not be able to take public transit themselves. And so what's that solution for them? And again, just really leaning in and learning from the customer and the rider on what their needs are.
Thanks, Stacy. Let's stick with you. We just heard from the panel of executives, and I'm just wondering what's your reaction to what they said, whether it's something surprising or something that you agree or disagree with. What's your reaction?
Yeah, no, as Kurt said, I really appreciate it. It was great to hear from all of them and just reminding myself that I think all of them are still relatively new and just hearing that excitement of the things they want to see change. So it was a wonderful, wonderful panel. I think one theme I heard throughout was this kind of concept. I don't think someone necessarily said it, but this all trips, all people, all time. I think it was Rick that mentioned the increase of weekend service, even being more than the pre-pandemic. I mean, that's amazing. But again, for the work that we do, we've been hearing that forever. We're not talking about people who are the typical commuter, the 9 to 5. We're talking about people who need to get to the local senior center, or need to get to, you know, an employment training or something like that. So I've appreciated that is something that they see and recognize, and how are we going to create a system that can support that? My fear is still a level of like, well, what are the performance metrics to know that these kinds of services don't get cut in the future, right? So it's great to think that we're kind of coming up with these innovative solutions to fill gaps, but I still hear, and it wasn't necessarily in this panel, but I still hear a lot about the metric is still ridership. And so again, when we look at that individual level and think about their mobility needs, what's going to get cut first is the services that, again, don't reach that maximum capacity. So how can we try to increase ridership? Absolutely. But not everyone is going to mold and conform to a specific, you know, mobility time of day and destination. And so really trying, you know, a cautionary tale of making sure we also think about the metrics so that those services don't end up being cut. That weekend service doesn't get added and then cut in 2 years, because people do depend on transportation to get around and access their community. And so what that impact looks like when we do make these service changes, we have to really, really work with the community to make sure that the impact is minimal or ideally completely eliminated.
Thanks. Kelsey, what about you? What's your reaction to what the executives, the panel said?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have so much respect for that panel, and we have incredible transit leaders in the Puget Sound region and across the state, really dedicated, passionate people who are just working really hard to make our systems work for communities. I think we heard a lot about some of the really cool stuff that's going on, you know. Love hearing about the success of the free transit passes, you know, paired with public housing, new projects coming online, really great stuff. I also heard, you know, some of the big threats that we're facing, I think, as an industry. You know, it's a tough context right now. I think you heard some of them mention staffing shortages. We're facing a huge transit operator shortage, which impacts service. I think some people probably have noticed that their regular service has probably been disrupted, and a lot of that is due to staffing shortages. You know, we're all hearing about safety incidents and drug use on transit. You know, a lot of system failures coming together on public transit right now. And we're still, you know, recovering from the pandemic and figuring that out. And so, you know, we need to really lean in and really fight together right now to keep our system safe and welcoming and working right now, so that we can retain transit riders and grow ridership. My greatest fear is that we start losing ridership, and then that goes into what's called the doom spiral, where we lose ridership and we lose support. And so what we really need to do is lean in and go for that virtuous cycle right now, where we are making transit work, where we're listening to what people need and responding. Just a small example of this is Sound Transit recently released a station activation plan, how they can get, you know, vendors and more activations in the Link light rail stations. This is something we know the public is really excited about. We know it fits with a lot of, you know, the city of Seattle's interests in economic recovery and activating downtown. So that's just one example of something that I really think we need to lean into right now.
Thanks, Kelsey. Kirk, what's your thinking, your response to what the executive said?
Yeah, I thought Michelle Allison's comment about the importance of childcare, and that resonated so much from what we've heard in our 2022 Seattle commute survey, that one, the intersection of childcare needs directly is one of the most powerful influencing factors of how we get around. Our 2022 Seattle commute survey, which got to survey over 64,000 people who go to work or school in Seattle, which is over 1 out of 10 people who work in the city. That survey found that the third highest reason why people said they drive alone was for childcare needs. And it revealed that people who have a child or a dependent at home are much more likely to drive alone to work or to other destinations than those without it. And so it really highlights for us at our organization, how can we help make getting around with a child by walking, biking, or the bus easier? If we can do that, we can make getting around by walking, biking, and the bus for work the first choice for more people as well.
Thanks, Kirk. Kelsey, another kind of general question to set up our discussion. What role does transportation play in our community, and how is it connected to other socioeconomic issues? So how is it connected to everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like transportation is at the intersection of pretty much everything. I got into transportation policy work by way of public health. I have my master's in public health, and you know, I really see transportation as a basic need, just like healthy food or clean air and clean drinking water. It's inherent. And I think we've become a little bit blind to really how many impacts transportation has on other sectors. It's the #2 cost for families behind housing. It's an extreme indicator of economic mobility, upward mobility. There was a Harvard study that said that commute time is the #1 predictor of if you can escape poverty. So huge ties to that. Obviously, climate and environmental justice, you know, huge intersection with transportation, the largest emitting sector. And so we have, you know, a ton of work to do, not only electrifying the sector, but also really getting people away from using single occupancy vehicles and onto public transit in order to meet our climate goals. And then, you know, undergirding all of this is that transportation is a social justice issue. I think across all of these other sectors, you see disproportionate impacts on communities of color, low-income people, people with disabilities, you know, and transportation and how we've planned it and how we've invested in transportation is at the heart of that. So I feel like it's integral to building the future that we want, the goals that we have for our region, an affordable region, a healthy, sustainable region, a thriving economy. We need to really get transportation right.
Thanks, Kelsey. Kirk, you've already mentioned the commute survey. What other results came out of that, and how do you think those results should influence our decision making in terms of transportation?
Thanks for that, Jeff. Yeah, and first I want to also thank everyone, those 64,000 people in our region who took our survey and shared their story with us about how they get around, not just from home to work, but for other different trip types. It was one, it helps inform our work and helps shape just our transportation system in this region. I think one of the other things that really jumped out at us is people ask us, well, if we have 50% of people remote working to the center city on Mondays and Fridays, why do we see traffic at nearly the same levels as we saw in 2019? And that's because we got to ask people how they get around for other trips that they take regularly, to grocery stores, to healthcare, to school pickup and drop off. And on average, 75% of the way that people get to those destinations is by driving alone. And those trips are about 80% of the trips that we take over the course of a week. Our trips from home to work are typically only about 20% of the trips taken over the course of a week. And so if we can find a way to make those trips to healthcare, groceries, school pickup and drop off, trips we take to the same destination on a regular basis, similar to a commute, if we can make those easier by biking, walking, and transit, we're going to make those options work for a lot more people. And we're also going to make Seattle a more affordable and sustainable place if we can do that.
Kirk, you might have answered this question already, but I see in the Q&A there's some specific questions about the change in usage between rush hour, adult rush hour, non-rush hour, senior student, pre-housing, before and after, well, before the pandemic and during pandemic. And And also a question on ridership for workers heading to downtown Seattle compared to before the pandemic. Do you have data on that?
We do. Our survey, this was the first real look at how people change from before the pandemic to after the pandemic. And when we look at how they get around for those work trips in central Seattle, we see that about 46% of the way that people get to work in central Seattle is by remote working. Another 21% is people driving alone. Another 22% are people taking public transit. Public transit used to be over 45% of the way that people got into central Seattle for work. But I want to go back and highlight that 21% drive alone rate. Sorry, I see my audio is a little bit choppy. Let me just wrap this up. That 21% drive alone rate is the lowest that we've ever tracked in our survey. And I think that highlights Director Spotz's recommendation that how do we rethink the use of our streets when we have fewer people driving alone into the center city.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. Stacy, can you talk about what the concept of the complete trip? I know you've mentioned this before about like serving everyone, but what is a complete trip from your perspective? What does that mean?
Thanks, Jeff. Absolutely. I appreciate this concept because it kind of can open up of like, oh yeah, of course. So when we think about complete trip, well, when we don't think about complete trip, a lot of times when we think of transportation accessibility and how to improve the network, we're okay, how to increase, fixed route transit, how to add more light rail. But when you really think of an individual trip, that start and end, that physical trip starts when you leave your home, leaves when you leave that origin. And honestly, when we get a lot of questions, fascinatingly, it's actually, how do I do home repair? How do I get outside I have a new disability. How can I age in place and leave my home if there's like a ramp that I can now use so I can actually just get outside? So let's start there, right? As soon as you leave your home, making sure that there's no stairs to be able to exit. And then you think of the whole journey on, the sidewalk to get to the bus stop, to get to the station. So you're really thinking about that complete trip from beginning to end physically. But one thing that people don't think about, especially for the populations that we work with, is actually your complete trip starts the moment you think you want to have a trip. And so in a lot of cases, a lot of our transportation options that are specialized, eligibility restricted, whether that's our paratransit systems or senior shuttles or anything that's kind of outside the on-demand transportation network, is sometimes you have to book that at least 24 hours, sometimes a week in advance. And so you're having to plan your trip, you're having to find that ride. Oh, I want to make this trip. I got to get to my doctor's appointment in 2 weeks. How am I going to do that? How am I going to find that ride? Do you start talking to friends? Who do you call? And so when we think about complete trip, it's not only the physical trip. And then I appreciate Craig talking about wayfinding, because that's a whole important piece too, and navigating while you're physically on the trip. But it can start already from the trip planning. And talk about it a lot more because when we got an inclusive planning grant back in 2018, HopeLink and our King County Mobility Coalition that we run, it was to try to tackle this. It was, how do we help support older adults and people with disabilities and caregivers find and secure transportation, and really used an inclusive planning lens to really work with people with disabilities and older adults on how we come up with a solution together. And I can talk about it more if there's time, but I'm really excited that we are going to be launching a truly multimodal trip planner in the coming months that brings together both fixed route public transportation as well as like eligibility restricted paratransit specialized services together, so that somebody can, when they're booking that trip, when they're planning that trip, can say, hey, I need to get to the grocery store. I need to do something that's outside my normal day-to-day, or, I recently moved, or again, situations changed. How do I find my ride? And we can have it be that one click or that one phone call to be able to access that your trip planning needs, so that it's all in one place. So really excited for solutions that we're developing in response to understanding that full complete trip.
Stacy, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, and in case you know this, what is the gap between where we are and where we really need to be? I'm sure it's pretty big. And are there other communities that are doing it really well? Like I don't know, San Francisco or other community populations, cities of similar size to Seattle?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, I did mobility management in New York City, so I will shout out to the work that was happening in New York City. But yeah, there's some really great, I mean, Portland has some really great solutions in terms of just being so forward in transportation investment for these populations and making sure that you know, no one's falling through the cracks. How are we learning about the transportation needs of our community and making sure that we can fill those gaps? We're getting closer. I mean, certainly in the time I've been in Seattle, about 7 years, it's amazing the investment that's been done in ensuring and filling those gaps, but there's still gaps. There's still people falling through the cracks. And we can talk about it in total and like in totality with the number of people, and maybe that's much smaller. But for an individual, it's a make or break of whether they can access their community or not. And so it's metrics and ridership, all that is so important. But for an individual, you know, that gap is the biggest for them, because again, it's a difference of them being able to get good quality of life. It's the difference of them being able to access their medical appointments. I mean, we still get phone calls of people who can't access chemotherapy, can't access dialysis. And it's like, what? Why have we not solved that? But at the same time, we also want to be solving how to get access to recreation, how to get access to play, how to make sure people can be connected again post-pandemic. So we're making great progress, but it's this reframing and making sure that we think about people holistically and what their mobility needs are. And yeah, I love learning from other cities. Again, there's several around the country, but the trip planner that we're working on, it is one of the few in the country, and they're really learning not only from the trip planner we're developing, but also some of our partners at Sound Transit and Commute Transit are putting together these trip planners, these solutions that can really help connect people to transportation options and leading the way for our region.
Thanks, Stacy. Talking about bridging the gaps and making progress, Kelsey, I know that Transportation Choices Coalition does a lot of advocacy work, and I'm wondering what your priorities are in terms of local and state advocacy for transportation at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. We are working on a lot of different things, but really focused on, as I've talked about, kind of shoring up the system and making sure it's sustainable. So I think number one for us is always our transit system and transit access adequately funded. A lot of people will have heard there was a big transportation package passed last year at the state legislature. We won about $5 billion for public transit and walking and biking. That's about 5 times more than the state's ever invested in multimodal transportation. So that was amazing. That money is, starting to flow. We're seeing it in things like the Youth Ride Free program, where 1.4 million youth in Washington can now ride public transit for free. So trying to keep that going. And the next kind of frontier in transit funding at the state, or in transportation funding, is around what's called a road usage charge. So there was some debate and a bill introduced this year, this legislative session, about this. It's essentially looking to replace the gas tax. A large proportion of our transportation system is funded through the gas tax, has been for a long time. The gas tax is restricted by constitutional amendment for highway spending only. So it's a really kind of restrictive funding source, and has really dictated how we've been able to invest in the transportation system as a whole for many, many years. So as legislators are considering this new policy, a road usage charge, which would basically charge drivers per mile that they charged, we're really focused on, if that moves forward, making sure that that funding can be flexible and that we can spend it based on how we want to reach our goals with the transportation system, rather than, really arbitrary amendment that was created many decades ago. So that's kind of like the next frontier in transportation funding. We're also working on transit safety, as I've mentioned, and we heard a lot about in the last panel. What are the suite of strategies that we can use to make riding transit safe and welcoming for all people? And, what we're really finding is we need a lot of different approaches, and we need solutions that fit the problem. And so, somebody smoking fentanyl on the bus, that's a really different issue than somebody sleeping on the bus. And we need different solutions that are appropriate. And so working with you know, a lot of the agencies are really digging in. You heard community transit, for example, did an amazing pilot program with social worker outreach that they are making permanent and investing in. So really trying to bring folks together, learn what the strategies are, and get the word out about how we can really be promoting transit safety. And then, as I mentioned, there's a big operator shortage. So trying to figure out how we can help address that. We're still kind of doing research on this. Some early, you know, we've heard from agencies everything from we need childcare, we need off hours childcare so we can hire so people can have their kids taken care of while they're driving a bus until 10 at night, to you know, we have different laws around marijuana usage in Washington, and we aren't eligible for federal funding if unless we require drug testing. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we can look at to start addressing the operator shortage, but it really is key to making sure we can use all that transit funding that we've won to provide really good service that people need. The last thing I'll mention that we're working on is, you know, we're always looking at how we can make the system more just. We have a whole suite of mobility justice policies that we're working on. A big one for us this year was reducing the impacts of jaywalking. We know that enforcement of any kind in transportation disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. And we found that to be true when it comes to jaywalking laws. Did a lot of research across the state. You know, if people can't walk to the bus or cross the street without being, you know, fear of harassment or disproportionate enforcement, we're not creating a system that's accessible or welcoming for all. So just a few of the things we're working on, just small issues to solve.
Just a few small issues, yeah. Kirk, Kelsey just mentioned public safety being one of the top priorities, and also we heard from the executive panel about that too. What have you heard in terms of transit safety and how that might impact what the commuters' transportation choices are right now?
Absolutely. I mean, safety is top of mind, not just for riders, but also for bus operators, and making that an appealing profession for people going into that field. When we did our 2022 Seattle commute survey, the data that we found was that safety was not in the top 3 reasons of why people choose the way they choose to get around. The top 3 travel considerations for people was getting from A to B as quickly as they can, the convenience and availability of their way to get around, and then the cost and affordability of it. Those are still the top 3. And if we can focus on making our transit system or other options the easiest way to get from A to B and meet people's needs, whether that's not just for a home to work trip, but a trip to grocery stores, healthcare, school pickup and drop off, we're going to make that a more appealing way for them to get around.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Stacy, kind of diverting a different topic here, but I know that HopeLink works a lot on the east side. And I'm wondering what are the issues, the transportation accessibility issues on the east side, like in rural areas or other places where that may not be getting the attention it deserves?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. That's great. So yes, HopeLink is primarily, especially our service centers are in East and North King County. And our team runs a number of mobility coalitions and subregions. And so we've had our East Side Coalition called the East Side Easy Rider Collaborative for nearly 20 years. And that we've been around, and again, cross-sector, bringing folks together to address mobility needs in East King County. But about 6-7 years ago, we actually established our Snoqualmie Valley Mobility Coalition. And it was in recognition that there's unique transportation challenges that are in Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland that are very different than Carnation and Snoqualmie. And so with the formation of that coalition, we've banded together with the cities and developed our Snoqualmie Valley coordinated transportation, like 5-year transportation plan. What's interesting, and we did a survey as well, it was not as fancy as Commute Seattle's. I am, tremendous kudos to Commute Seattle for their work surveying so many people, a lot less people in Snoqualmie Valley, but we surveyed and very similar things. People want to get around, they want to get around, they want to access their community, they want to get there, as quickly as they can, and affordability. So it is interesting how similarities are, I think expectations are what's different, right? No one in Snoqualmie Valley, I mean, I could be wrong, but there's some people in Snoqualmie Valley that would like access, 10-minute frequencies, but expectations are a little different, but they need something, they need some choice. And what happens in rural areas is if their car breaks down or they have a life situation that prevents them from driving or can't afford it, or just youth who can't drive, people who are non-drivers just naturally, there's nothing for them, or there can be nothing for them to get to their destination or to get, access on the weekends. There is no transportation service in Snoqualmie Valley in the weekends right now. So, it's again, expectations are not that they need 5-10 minute, frequencies, but we need something. We need to plan something together. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in Snoqualmie Valley to address that and working with King County Metro to make sure that there is robust access within the valley and getting outside the valley. What's interesting though is that doesn't mean Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, Issaquah doesn't have transportation needs either. And I think one thing that I always want to make sure is very clear is yes, there's a misperception that this area is transit rich and income levels are high to where there's not need there. And we get calls over and over and over again of individuals, tends to be older adults that are on a fixed income that cannot access the transit network as is, cannot drive anymore, and cannot access their community, and it's broken down. So, there's this misperception in the East Side that transit is covered and everyone's taken care of, but they're not, and there needs to be really, really strong intentional solutions that are co-created with the community. Really proud of a partnership that we have. That Sound Generations has developed a transportation solution on the East Side and really worked with the community to develop what that solution could look like. They're an organization that, again, serves older adults in a number of different ways, including transportation. And so, again, really working with the community to uncover what their transportation needs are. But it's completely unique. Our South King County Coalition has different needs and working. And so just each geographic area, each population, each circumstance is going to continue to be unique. And we need to be able to amplify what those needs are to decision makers like King County Metro, like Sound Transit. There's a lot of change that's going to be coming to the East Side very soon. Hopefully it was 2023, but coming soon enough. And people need to understand how to access the system as well. So a lot of education is also going to be needed for the investment that's coming to the East Side pretty soon.
Thanks, Stacy. I have kind of another question for Kirk, not on our script, but I know that you work with a bunch of different organizations and try to pull people together and collaborate on this complex issue. How do you think it's working, for one, and how do you think all these issues, everything from pedestrian access to bike lanes to rapid bus lines to metro, how can that all be pulled together? Is it working, and how can it be better coordinated or put together?
Great question, Jeff. I think I also have a perspective from a previous role working in New York City, working with people to improve public transit across the country, to really see just how lucky we are in this region with the leaders that we heard from in the previous panel, leading our agencies, plus the wealth of the nonprofit organizations like HopeLink and Transportation Choices Coalition that are building these connections, doing the advocacy to support the investments, and really making our transportation system here one that helps address affordability and accessibility and makes our region more vibrant and inclusive and accessible. So we have a wealth of organizations and leadership here to make this happen. I think what we hear is, I think there's a lot we can do to help make this system as easy as possible for people to use. And I think you see that a lot in terms of, we have a huge demand of people who want to be able to use our system, but just understanding how to get a fare card to be able to use it. And people don't want to be embarrassed to get on the bus. I mean, I admit to not understanding how to stop the bus the first time I got on. And I remember the fear of not knowing how to stop the bus at the bus stop and seeing someone pull the cable and realizing there's a lot of work that we can do. And I think the youth fare pass is a great way to help build that support and that knowledge from a young age of how to get people thinking that transit can work for them and showing how transit can work for them. I think another thing that we see at Commute Seattle is work getting employers to provide transit passes to their employees. And a huge change that we've seen from before the pandemic to today is that we've seen just a sea change in who is reaching out to us to provide transit passes to their employees. We've seen retail businesses, personal services, and hospitality businesses reaching out to us to get transit passes. And it's a much smaller size business that is reaching out to us. And that's because the cost to provide those transit passes to your employees is much lower now. And we see those businesses wanting to retain and recruit the best talent. And so today, when you go to Molly Moon's or you get a tattoo at Deep Roots Tattoo Studio, the employee there has a transit pass. And I think it's something how we can continue to encourage that to really help these smaller businesses provide transit passes to their employees, because it's a huge savings to the employee if the employer provides that transit pass to them.
Thanks, Kirk. Kelsey, we're all part of this system, right? It's not just the nonprofits that are doing the work, and we're all as riders, as bike riders. But what can we do? What can an individual do to get more involved and help this complex transportation system that we're all grappling with? How can an individual kind of get involved and advocate for better transportation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think number one is everyone stay engaged as a voter. I was going to build off what Kirk said, and we have a lot of a supportive ecosystem here, I would say, but we also have incredibly supportive voters. The last transit measure that was on the ballot in Seattle passed with 82% of the vote. So people love transit, even if they don't ride it, they know how important it is. We have a lot of buy-in. And so I would say, stay engaged politically and keep voting for this transformation that we need in our transportation system, and for people who are going to support it. I would say, second, we all get to make choices every day about our behavior. We can choose to use the system differently. And I think something that we haven't talked about is that getting to this state of an amazing system with great access and bike lanes and sidewalks and transit with dedicated lanes, it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice from the way we've been doing things for a long time. I think I just saw recently that London bicyclists have now eclipsed the number of people driving downtown in London. That wasn't easy. They made really hard decisions that I think were pretty painful for a period of time. They implemented a congestion charge. So if you wanted to drive downtown, you had to pay a toll. They've built these amazing cycle superhighways, these big bike lanes that were really safe and comfortable for all types of people to use, at the expense of, roads that used to be dedicated to probably parking and vehicle lanes. And those are hard choices, and the public isn't always totally on board with them, because we want both what we don't have and the way for things to stay the same so we can enjoy the convenience we've had. So I think part of it is we need to be okay with going through some periods of transformation. And then I think the people, for superstars who want to get extra engaged, they should sign up for our newsletter. They'll get our action alerts. We can train them up to go testify for the legislature and for city council. There's no shortage of work to be done, as I mentioned.
Excellent. Well, we have produced a resource guide for all participants, and we'll definitely get that out to you if we haven't already, with all the links to everyone you've heard from today, all the organizations and articles and resources for you to take advantage of, and civic engagement opportunities as well. So Stacy, what would you say to that same question? How can people get involved?
Yeah, well, I was talking about it earlier, but inclusive planning is just a lens and a mindset that we've just really embraced, and trying to encourage that in the transportation sector as much as possible. So if you're a partner organization, if if you're a decision maker at all, listening to this, really stop and listen to your community, learn from your community, and recognize that the community members, the people we're trying to get to ride the system, are the experts in understanding what's needed in the system. And so again, I'm going to call out anyone who is a decision maker to take advantage of that and really shift the power and giving more access and more say for people who are being impacted by the transportation system. And then on the flip side, right, those opportunities that people can have to be on a commission, to be on a board, to be volunteering at any of our organizations, and just, you know, being able to have a say and voicing those opinions and really taking that and not trying to, you know, we have to reframe this idea of like the public comment period and really make sure that we're co-creating solutions together. I'm wanted to give a shout out to SDOT because one pilot that they did, it's no longer available, but it was in the city of Seattle, a pilot called Ride Now pilot that the city of Seattle did, and it was an extremely well, like, inclusive engagement. You know, the participants were made up of people with disabilities, giving them power to decision making and how they created that solution. And it worked. And I really do encourage folks to again participate and partner with decision makers on these solutions together. And I just, you know, I love just the opportunity that we have to work with our partners like Commute Seattle and Transportation Choices Coalition. And so again, hopefully you can stay engaged with one of us or all of us in some way, shape, or form. Thanks.
Thanks, Stacy. And Kirk, what about your response to that? How can people get engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting plugged in to the great work of the organizations like Hope Link and Transportation Choices Coalition, at Commute Seattle, following our work at commuteseattle.com. And plus, one of the most important things we can do is encourage our employers to offer transit passes to our employees. It's one thing that it can save just a huge amount of money for employees to be able to have their employer take on that cost at a much subsidized rate. So one, I'd encourage folks to go to Commute Seattle, learn more about our work, learn more about how they can get plugged in, and also learn more about how they can ask their boss to pay for their bus pass. So thank you so much for having us here today, Jeff.
Yeah, well, thank you all for joining me and the participants and having this wonderful conversation.